I want you to close your eyes for just a moment. Try to remember a very specific sound from your childhood. Perhaps it is the distant, cheerful jingle of an ice cream truck slowly turning the corner of your street. Or maybe it is the sharp, rhythmic clicking of a metal lawn sprinkler throwing cold water across the hot, freshly cut grass. Welcome back, my friend. Today, we are taking a gentle journey back in time to the 1970s and 80s. We are going to explore 20 magical summer rituals that defined growing up in America. It was an era of scraped knees, sticky fingers, and a profound sense of neighborhood freedom. We will walk through memories that might have been hiding in the back of your mind for decades. And please, stay with me until the very end, because we are going to revisit that one beautifully bittersweet event that always meant our magical summer was finally coming to a close. Before we dive into our memories, let us take a moment to remember how time actually felt back then. If you grew up in America during the 1960s, 70s, or 80s, you know that time seemed to flow entirely differently. The days were longer, slower, and completely unhurried. Today, people are constantly connected to a glowing screen, always rushing and expecting instant gratification. But back then, waiting was a fundamental part of the joy. We waited for our favorite song to play on the radio. We waited for the sun to brew a pitcher of tea. We waited all day for our friends to come out and play. There is a modern myth that because we did not have cell phones or the internet, we somehow lived poorer, more boring lives. But you and I know the exact opposite is true. Without those digital distractions, our lives were infinitely richer. We were emotionally present. We interacted with the physical world, feeling the hot pavement beneath our bare feet and the humid summer breeze on our faces. Our childhoods were built on deep, genuine human connections, shared adventures, and a beautiful, wild freedom that kids today can scarcely even imagine. Let us step back into that warm sunshine. Close your eyes and imagine the distant tinkling melody echoing down a hot suburban street. It was the siren song of summer, the local ice cream truck slowly making its way through your neighborhood. Do you remember the sheer panic and exhilaration that followed? You would drop whatever you were doing, sprinting into the house to beg your mother for some spare change. With a handful of silver coins clutched tightly in your sweaty palm, you ran back out, hoping you had not missed it. Standing barefoot on the scorching asphalt, you examined the colorful stickers on the side of the truck. Would it be a red, white, and blue bomb pop? A drumstick with its crunchy peanut coating? Or maybe a creamsicle? The transaction was a sacred summer ritual. The driver, often a familiar neighborhood face, would hand down that frosty treat wrapped in crinkly paper. As you peeled it back, the summer heat immediately began to melt the ice cream, sending sweet, sticky drips down your fingers and chin. We did not care about the mess. We would sit on the grassy curb with our friends, eating as fast as we could before the sun won the battle. Our tongues dyed vibrant shades of cherry red and blue raspberry. It was a fleeting moment of pure, sugary bliss that tasted exactly like freedom. Let us move from the sweet taste of ice cream to another unforgettable flavor of our youth. Think about the intense, blistering heat of a July afternoon in the 1970s. You and your friends had been playing outside for hours, completely exhausted and terribly thirsty. Going inside for a glass of water meant risking being told to stay indoors or being given chores. Instead, you gravitated toward the side of the house where the green rubber garden hose lay coiled in the dirt. Do you recall the exact sequence of this ritual? You would turn the metal spigot, waiting for the water to rush through the sun-baked rubber. The first few seconds were crucial. You had to let the scalding hot water spray out onto the grass before it finally turned icy cold. Then you would bend over, placing your lips near the brass nozzle, and drink deeply. That water had a distinct, unmistakable flavor. It tasted of metal, warm rubber, and earth, yet it was the most refreshing, satisfying drink you could possibly imagine. We never worried about filtered water or plastic bottles back then. We shared that same nozzle with our siblings, our neighbors, and sometimes even the family dog. It was our communal fountain of youth, keeping us hydrated and ready for the next great backyard adventure. Now think back to the ultimate boundary of our childhood freedom, the flickering glow of the neighborhood streetlights. In those days, our bicycles were not just toys. They were our trusted steeds. We rode Schwinn Stingrays with glittering banana seats and high-rise handlebars, feeling like the kings and queens of the block. We used wooden clothespins to attach old baseball cards to the spokes, creating a loud, rhythmic motor sound as we pedaled furiously down the pavement. There were no cell phones to track us, no text messages calling us home for dinner. We simply roamed the neighborhood, completely untethered from the adult world. But we all knew the universal rule of a 1970 summer. When the sun began to dip below the horizon and the sky turned a deep shade of indigo, a quiet hum would fill the air. One by one, the tall streetlights would flicker to life, casting a pale, yellowish pool of light onto the asphalt. That was our curfew. That was the undisputed signal that the magical day was over. Do you remember the sudden rush of pedaling as fast as your legs could carry you, racing the darkness to make it back to your driveway before your parents started worrying? We always tried to squeeze out just 5 more minutes of playtime in that fading twilight. Let us recall a time when we did not need an expensive water park to cool down. We just needed the front lawn and a simple metal contraption. The oscillating lawn sprinkler was the centerpiece of many sweltering summer afternoons. You would hear the familiar clicking, whirring sound as the metal arm swung back and forth, tossing a delicate fan of water across the freshly cut grass. Do you remember standing on the edge of the spray zone, anticipating the icy shock? You would close your eyes, take a deep breath, and sprint right through the falling water. The sudden blast of cold on your sun-kissed skin would make you shriek with laughter. We would invent endless games, trying to jump over the watery arch, or seeing who could stand in the middle the longest without getting completely soaked. Sometimes, the grass would get so saturated that our bare feet would slip, sending us tumbling into the muddy, wonderful mess. The smell of wet earth mixed with the sharp, clean scent of water drops on the hot sidewalk is something that stays with you forever. It was a simple joy, created with nothing more than a turning tap and a piece of garden equipment. But it brought the whole neighborhood together in a chaotic, beautiful symphony of childhood joy. Let us take a drive down memory lane to a Friday night ritual that feels like a distant dream today. Can you smell the rich, buttery aroma of popcorn mixing with the cool night air? Going to the drive-in movie theater in the 1970s was a massive family event. Your parents would pile you and your siblings into the back of the wood-paneled station wagon. We were usually already dressed in our pajamas, clutching our favorite pillows and scratchy plaid blankets. As you pulled into the dusty gravel lot, The sheer size of the glowing white screen against the starry sky felt enormous and magical. Your father would roll down the window and hook the heavy metal speaker onto the glass. The sound was always slightly muffled, filled with a gentle, comforting static that added to the charm. We would sit on the tailgate or on the roof of the car, eating homemade sandwiches and watching a double feature. As the night wore on, the heavy summer air and the hypnotic flickering of the screen would inevitably make your eyelids heavy. More often than not, you would fall asleep long before the second movie ended, only to wake up the next morning, safely tucked in your own bed, carrying the faint, smoky scent of the drive-in with you. Let us drift back to those humid twilight hours when the world seemed to hold a quiet kind of magic. As the heat of the day finally broke, a different kind of life awakened in the tall grass. Do you remember the thrill of spotting that first tiny flash of neon green light in the growing darkness? Catching fireflies, or lightning bugs as we often called them, was a nightly summer pursuit. You would grab a clean, empty glass mayonnaise jar from the kitchen, and your father would carefully punch a few jagged holes in the metal lid with a hammer and a nail. Then you would run out into the yard, your hands cupped together like a delicate trap. You had to be quick, gently snatching them out of the warm air without hurting their fragile wings. Slowly, your glass jar would fill up with a dozen little glowing creatures, turning into a living, breathing lantern. We would sit on the back porch, staring, mesmerized at the rhythmic blinking, wondering how such a tiny bug could hold a star inside its belly. Before heading up to bed, we always opened the lid, watching our glowing captives fly back up into the branches of the old oak tree. It was our own private light show, a gentle connection with nature that no television screen could ever possibly replicate. Now let us remember a thrilling backyard attraction that required a lot of courage and resulted in quite a few bruises. When the long yellow strip of plastic known as the slip and slide was rolled out onto the front lawn, you knew it was going to be a spectacular afternoon. We did not care that the ground beneath it was bumpy and uneven. The ritual was always the same. You would pin down the corners, attach the garden hose, and wait for the thin film of water to cover the bright yellow surface. Then came the running start. You would back up, sprint across the damp grass, and throw yourself headfirst onto the slippery plastic. Do you remember the exhilarating rush of hydroplaning across the yard, the wind in your face and the water splashing into your eyes? But you also surely remember the sudden, painful stop when you hit a dry patch. Your skin would screech against the plastic, or you would slide completely off the runway, tumbling directly into a patch of hard dirt and crabgrass. We wore our scraped knees and bruised ribs like badges of honor. It was a chaotic physical joy, completely free of safety gear or parental hovering, teaching us to embrace the bumps and bruises that came with having the time of our lives. Let us step off the grass and onto the polished wooden floor of the local roller skating rink. For many of us growing up in the 1970s and 80s, the skating rink was the absolute center of our social universe during the hot summer months. As soon as you pushed through the heavy glass doors, you were hit with a blast of glorious air conditioning and the distinct scent of floor wax mixed with concession stand hot dogs. Do you remember sitting on the carpeted benches, struggling to lace up those heavy, tan leather skates with the orange polyurethane wheels? The laces always seemed a mile long. Then you would step out onto the smooth rink, the wheels making a low, rumbling hum against the wood. The disco ball spun slowly overhead, scattering glittering shards of light across the dark room, while the latest hits by the Bee Gees or Donna Summer blasted from the speakers. We skated in endless circles, trying to look cool, practicing skating backward, and nervously hoping for a chance to hold hands during the couples skate. It was a place of first crushes, innocent heartbreaks, and pure, rhythmic motion. The rink was a safe haven where we felt grown up, gliding through the summer, one song at a time. Let us travel back to a time when our imaginations were the only tools we needed to construct entire kingdoms. During those endless summer weeks, building a fort was a serious neighborhood endeavor. Whether it was in the patch of dense woods behind the subdivision or just tucked away in a corner of your own backyard, these sanctuaries were strictly off-limits to adults. Do you remember scavenging the neighborhood for building materials? We would drag discarded pieces of plywood, old tarps, cardboard boxes, and broken branches to our secret location. We built crude, magnificent structures, hammering rusty nails into tree trunks and tying branches together with frayed pieces of twine. Inside those cramped, dusty spaces, we created our own rules and our own societies. We would furnish our forts with stolen sofa cushions, milk crates, and flashlights with dying batteries. We spent hours in there, hiding from the blistering sun, reading comic books, sharing secrets, and plotting grand adventures. The fort was a physical manifestation of our independence. It was a space that belonged entirely to us, a little piece of the world where we were the masters of our own destiny, safe from the watchful eyes of the grown-ups. Let us sit for a moment on the front porch and recall a quiet, slow ritual that tasted like pure summer. Long before the era of instant powdered mixes and fancy iced coffees, there was the gentle, patient art of making sun tea. Your mother would take a large, heavy glass pitcher, the kind with the thick ridges on the side, and fill it to the brim with fresh water. Then came the magical ingredient, a handful of Lipton tea bags, their white strings dangling over the edge of the rim. She would set the pitcher right on the concrete steps of the porch, right where the midday sun beat down the hardest. Do you remember watching it throughout the afternoon? It was a lesson in patience. You would see the clear water slowly, beautifully bleed into a rich, deep amber as the heat of the sun gently brewed the tea. It took hours, but the anticipation made it taste so much better. By late afternoon, the glass would be warm to the touch. She would bring it inside, pour it over a tall glass filled to the top with cracking ice cubes, and stir in a spoonful of white sugar. That cold, refreshing sip, slightly earthy and perfectly sweet, was the ultimate reward for a hot, lazy day. It was the taste of time standing still. Now let us recall the nights when it was simply too hot to sleep in our own beds. In an era before central air conditioning became a standard luxury, escaping the stifling heat of our bedrooms was a necessary summer adventure. Do you remember the excitement of dragging your heavy canvas sleeping bag out to the screened-in porch? Or perhaps setting up a canvas tent in the backyard? The air outside felt different. It was heavy, humid, and deeply fragrant with the scent of cut grass and blooming honeysuckle. Lying there in the dark, the sounds of the night were magnified. You could hear the rhythmic, hypnotic chorus of cicadas and crickets, a lullaby that belonged only to the summer months. We would lie awake for hours with our siblings or neighborhood friends, shining flashlights under our chins to tell ghost stories that made our hearts race. Every rustle of the bushes sounded like a wild animal, adding a delicious thrill of danger to the night. When we finally drifted off to sleep, enveloped in the cool night breeze, we felt like brave explorers. Waking up the next morning with the sun shining through the screens and a thin layer of dew on the grass, we knew we had survived the beautiful, wild night. Let us pack our bags and head toward the scent of salt air and the crashing waves of a family beach trip. A summer vacation in the 1970s was an event built on beautiful, messy traditions. Can you close your eyes and instantly summon the distinct coconut and floral smell of classic Coppertone sunscreen? It was the official perfume of July. We would load up the car with folding aluminum lawn chairs, scratchy beach towels, and a heavy metal cooler packed with sandwiches wrapped in wax paper. Do you remember the feeling of the hot, powdery sand burning the bottoms of your feet as you sprinted toward the cool relief of the ocean? We spent hours combing the shoreline, searching for the perfect seashells, carefully washing off the sand and wrapping them in napkins to take home as precious treasures. We ate our lunch sitting on a blanket, never minding the inevitable crunch of sand that found its way into our potato chips and ham sandwiches. We built grand sand castles with plastic buckets and shovels, watching with a mix of awe and sadness as the incoming tide slowly washed our hard work away. The ride home was always quiet, our skin tight from the sun, our hair stiff with salt, feeling deeply exhausted and perfectly happy. Let us step back into the neighborhood streets just as the shadows began to grow long and spooky. When the evening cooled down, the real games began. The absolute king of all twilight neighborhood games was Kick the Can, or perhaps you called it Ghost in the Graveyard. It was a game that required no money, no equipment, and no adult supervision. Just a crushed aluminum soda can and a group of willing kids. Do you remember the sheer adrenaline rush of scattering into the darkness while the seeker counted by the street lamp? The neighborhood transformed. Every parked car, every thick hedge, and every shadowed porch became a strategic hiding spot. You would crouch in the damp grass, holding your breath, listening to the crunch of footsteps drawing near. Your heart would pound so loudly in your chest, you were certain the seeker could hear it. The goal was to sprint from the shadows, outrun the seeker, and boot that dented metal can down the street with a resounding clatter, freeing all the captured players. It was a game of stealth, speed, and immense bravery. We learned to navigate the darkness, to trust our instincts, and to revel in the joyous, chaotic shouting that echoed through the quiet suburban streets. Let us travel away from the neighborhood for a moment and remember the bittersweet experience of sleepaway summer camp. For many, this was the ultimate test of independence in the 1970s and 80s. Your parents would pack a heavy canvas trunk with your clothes, every item painstakingly labeled with your name in permanent marker. Do you remember the smell of the damp wooden cabins, a mixture of pine needles, dusty sleeping bags, and insect repellent? We spent our days weaving plastic lanyards in arts and crafts, swimming in a murky lake with a muddy bottom, and drinking an endless supply of brightly colored, sugary bug juice in the noisy mess hall. There was a unique rhythm to camp life. dictated by the blowing of a bugle or the ringing of a large bell. At night, we gathered around a massive, crackling bonfire, singing silly songs and roasting marshmallows until they were blackened and perfectly gooey. Of course, there were moments of deep homesickness, sitting quietly on your bunk, writing a letter to your mother on slightly damp stationery. But by the time the bus arrived to take you home at the end of the summer, you were tanned, covered in mosquito bites, and crying because you did not want to leave your new best friends. Now let us recall the absolute peak of the American summer, the deafening, smoky celebration of the 4th of July. This was not a holiday managed by city planners with synchronized laser shows. This was a gritty, loud neighborhood affair. Do you remember the pungent, lingering smell of sulfur and burnt paper that drifted through the streets all day long? We would empty our pockets to buy packages of black cats, tossing the tiny firecrackers onto the hot pavement and running away as they snapped and popped. The older kids would carefully light a smoke bomb, turning the driveway into a colorful, hazy cloud. But the true magic happened when the sun went down. Your father would hand you a long wire sparkler. When it finally caught the flame, it erupted into a brilliant, sizzling star in your hand. You would run across the dark lawn, waving your arm wildly, trying to write your name in the air before the sparks finally burned down to the bare wire. We sat on the curb, eating warm watermelon, watching as the neighborhood dads set off small fountains and Roman candles that lit up the faces of everyone on the block. It was a slightly dangerous, wonderfully chaotic celebration of community and summer nights. Let us dive into another cornerstone of our youth, the municipal public swimming pool. If your family did not have a pool in the backyard, this concrete oasis was where you spent almost every afternoon. Even before you walked through the chain-link fence, you could smell the sharp, stinging scent of chlorine wafting through the hot air. Do you remember the absolute panic of walking barefoot across the scorching concrete deck, desperately tiptoeing to avoid burning the soles of your feet? The pool was a massive, swirling bowl of organized chaos. We would spend hours playing Marco Polo with our eyes squeezed shut, or diving to the bottom to retrieve heavy rubber rings. But the ultimate test of courage was the high diving board. You would stand shivering in line, wrapping your arms around yourself, watching the older kids do flips. When it was your turn, climbing those wet, slippery metal stairs felt like climbing a mountain. Walking out to the edge of the textured board, the water looked incredibly far away. Taking that leap, plunging into the icy blue water and emerging breathless on the surface made you feel invincible. Afterward, you would buy a frozen Milky Way or some salty French fries from the snack bar, feeling utterly complete. Let us step out of the hot sun and retreat to the cool shade of the front porch for a quieter kind of adventure. In an era before video games and endless streaming channels, our summer escapism came printed on cheap, colorful paper. Do you remember the spinning wire rack at the local drugstore or corner market? It creaked softly as you turned it, scanning the brightly colored covers. For just a few coins, you could buy a brand new comic book. Maybe you loved the dramatic superhero battles of Spider-Man or Batman, or perhaps you preferred the gentle, humorous high school drama of Archie, Betty, and Veronica. The paper had a distinct, slightly sweet and dusty smell. You would bring your treasure home, sit on the top step of the porch, and completely lose yourself in those ink-stained pages. Your fingers would get slightly smudged from the cheap printing as you flipped through the panels. We traded them with our friends, arguing over who was the strongest hero and carefully stacking them in cardboard boxes under our beds. Reading a comic book on a lazy Tuesday afternoon with a cold glass of lemonade sweating on the concrete beside you was a quiet ritual of imagination that slowed down the rushing clock of summer. Let us buckle up for a family journey that defined a generation. Long-distance road trips in the family station wagon were an endurance test filled with unique textures and shared misery that somehow turned into fond memories. Before the luxury of minivans with built-in screens and dual-zone climate control, we traveled in massive steel boats. Do you remember the feeling of sliding onto those wide vinyl seats that had been baking in the sun? Without air conditioning, the only relief was rolling down all the windows, letting the deafening roar of the highway wind blow fiercely through the cabin. You and your siblings were packed into the back, often sitting in the rear-facing pop-up seats, watching the world rapidly shrink away behind you. To pass the hours, we did not have tablets to stare at. We played the license plate game, diligently scanning passing cars, or we played punch buggy every time a Volkswagen Beetle drove by. There were endless arguments over crossing invisible boundary lines on the seat, and the constant chorus of asking if we were there yet. The journey was long, sticky, and loud, but those hours spent crammed together in that rolling metal box forged unbreakable bonds of shared family history. Let us tune in to the soundtrack that scored all of these beautiful memories. Before we could instantly summon any song we wanted with a voice command, music required dedication and a bit of luck. The absolute king of summer music was the AM radio, particularly listening to the top 40 countdowns on a Sunday morning. Do you remember the voice of Casey Kasem smoothly transitioning from long-distance dedications to the #1 song in the country? You would sit on the carpet in your bedroom with your portable cassette player, resting your finger on the red record button, waiting with breathless anticipation. You had to time it perfectly. You wanted to hit record just as the DJ stopped talking, hoping to capture your favorite song entirely without missing the beginning or catching the station identification at the end. We created our own mixtapes through sheer patience, capturing the crackly, imperfect audio of summer hits. You would play that cassette until the tape wore thin, carrying the heavy boombox out to the porch or taking it to the park. Every time you hear one of those classic 1970s tracks today, it immediately transports you back to that bedroom floor, waiting for your song to finally play. Finally, let us walk through the dusty gates of the event that always signaled the bittersweet end of our magical season, the late summer county fair. By the time August rolled into September, the evenings began to carry a crisp, cool hint of autumn. The fair was a sensory explosion. Do you remember the overwhelming, intoxicating smell that hit you immediately? It was a thick, heavenly mixture of deep-fried funnel cakes, spun sugar cotton candy, roasted corn, and the distinct, earthy odor of the livestock barns. We would wander the midway as the sun set, our pockets jingling with saved-up allowance money. The flashing neon lights of the Ferris wheel and the tilt-a-whirl seemed to touch the sky. You would throw darts at deflated balloons, desperately trying to win a giant stuffed animal, or toss ping-pong balls into tiny glass bowls in hopes of carrying home a live goldfish in a plastic bag. As you rode the Ferris wheel to the very top, stopping to rock gently in the cool night air, you could look out over the glowing lights of the fairgrounds. In that high, quiet moment, you knew summer was slipping away. It was a beautiful, chaotic farewell to freedom, a final burst of joy before the school bells rang and the world grew serious once again. As we look back at these 20 memories, it becomes wonderfully clear what we are truly missing. We do not just miss the physical objects like the heavy cassette tapes, the metal roller skates, or the yellow plastic water slides. What we deeply ache for is the way we felt when we held them. We miss the innocence of our youth, the unhurried passage of time, and the pure physical connection we shared with our families and our neighborhood friends. Those summers were a magical kingdom where we ruled the streets until the streetlights came on, entirely rich in the things that truly mattered. I want to thank you for walking down this beautiful memory lane with me today. If this video brought a smile to your face, or perhaps a nostalgic tear to your eye, please give it a thumbs up and subscribe to the channel so we can continue remembering the good old days together. Now, I want to hear from you. Which of these 1970s and 80s summer rituals was your absolute favorite? Or is there a special childhood memory we missed? Please, pour yourself a glass of iced tea and share your beautiful stories in the comments below.